All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, State of IT 2022. My name is Ashley Limbers, and I'll be the moderator today. I'm the marketer here at Total Computer Solutions, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. Total Computer Solutions is a full service of IT support and services, including network security, cloud computing, network administration, and managed backup services here in Central North Carolina. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Andy Purcell. Andy is our business consultant at TCS. He has over 20 years of IT and security consulting experience. He is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And additionally, Andy has held certifications from VMware, Citrix, EMC, and is a Cisco Business Value Specialist. This invaluable combination of education and experience helps Andy find TCS clients the right solutions to grow their business. And before I hand the mic over to Andy, I have a few items to cover about the presentation and the Zoom platform. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, and it will be emailed to you. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to type those into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We'll be answering questions at the end of today's session. And if we don't get to your question during the session today, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. Please stay till the very end of the webinar. We will be giving away a $25 Amazon gift card. So without further ado, Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Ashley, and welcome everybody today. I appreciate you joining us and spending some of your morning with us. What I really plan to do is to go through the slides, discuss some of the trends that we're seeing going into 2022. There will be a few poll questions along the way just to get a feel for things that are important to you, and then there will be a Q&A session at the end. So I'm planning on 30-35 minutes of me talking and hopefully a few more at the end of that of you guys asking questions back. So with that done, we'll go ahead and jump into the presentation. If you do have anything that's very pressing, do use the chat feature and ask a question. I believe there's even a question feature that you can use in the Q&A option rather than the chat, and use that if you have something, and we'll get to that when time permits. So thank you very much again, and we'll go ahead and jump in. What we want to do is to look at the coming year in a number of different ways. And so as we look at the overview of today, we want to talk about some of the factors that are leading into the growth in budgets for the coming year. We also want to look at some of the challenges and how those can be opportunities for us. Security is a huge part of everything we live and breathe these days, and those changes will continue as we go into 22. Hopefully, maybe not quite at the rapid pace of the past two with all the work at home that we've had, but I'm sure there will be changes and growth in that part of the industry as well. And then maybe look at some strategies to stay productive, keep business going, and then also maybe gain some advantages in the next year. So as we want to look at some of the revenue trends, it's very encouraging. 61% of companies expect to have their revenues grow in 2022, whether that's some hangover from the past couple of years of pandemic-related stagnation in the industry, or whether that's just a sign of optimism, or if that's just the recovery of the economy. I think it's a good sign that we're looking for growth during the next year. And then specifically, if we want to dig down into IT growth, 72% of companies that are in manufacturing or the retail sectors, distribution would also be included in that, are looking to see revenues increase, and that will then trickle down into the IT budgets of increasing as well. 70% of the financial services industry, as people get back to rebuilding portfolios and managing them and moving them around to what the new economy has to hold, you're seeing 70% of people who expect revenues to rise there. So I think we can expect along with that over the next year to see IT budgets continue to grow and expand. And some of that is technology driven, some of that is economically driven. And all of it is good news, I think, as we look to take care of and grow our businesses. Within some of those budget trends in IT themselves, almost 2/3 of enterprises or larger businesses plan to raise their budgets. And then almost half of small to medium-sized businesses are looking to do the same thing. So as you can imagine, larger companies are seeing more expansion or expansion at a faster rate as the economy changes and as things come back from a business standpoint. Some of that will determine what the economy at large does, not just within revenue and industry. 2/3 of businesses that are in the financial services sector also expect to see their budgets grow. So if you think about that, it's insurance, it's investing, the banks themselves. So you're going to see growth there, and that's very encouraging from an IT standpoint. If we want to look at some of those factors and some of these factors we'll hit in multiple parts of the conversation, and you'll see the themes recur. But we've all taken a break over the last really 2 years, 2020 and 21. We've allowed PCs to age. We've not changed our server infrastructure. We probably have not grown security except by necessity. So a lot of that is simply stagnation across the IT industry and the IT within individual companies. And I think we're going to see some of that old infrastructure continue to be replaced as we go through 2022. And that's going to affect a lot of the support that we provide as a company, a lot of the support that you provide for your users on your end. I did just mention a moment ago, increased security and then employee growth. Many companies are hiring right now. Many companies can't find people. I'm sure you hear in the news, but those who can are hiring at an increased rate, which is great news. But with that comes security concerns for existing and for new employees, the way the networks are changing, more movements to the cloud, as we'll discuss later. People working from home has been a major impact that's going to be represented a couple times today in different areas. But I think we want to see that organizations are looking to become more secure. They're having to secure multiple locations with work at home employees as well as in the office. And you're having BYOD or bring your own device policies as the same devices are being used in both places. But you do need to lock them down because you don't want the kids watching movie and playing games and things like that on the company-owned hardware. So just a few things to think about as we go through the technology growth. If we want to look at specifics as we drill even further, there's been a big change in the cloud industry. It's been coming, but it has accelerated the past 2 years, primarily from people who are working at home. So as you can imagine, the challenge with an employee working at home is greater even than what you have when they're in the office, because you still have the concerns of people accessing your server, the server health, maintaining that machine. If you move it to the cloud, it comes with its own set of security issues that you're managing. So if you add to that an offsite employee, you have to do things like lock that down with a VPN so you have a secured encrypted tunnel. You've got to make sure the device they're on is encrypted. So if they leave that laptop in a cab or they leave it at the park or wherever they may go to work that day, if that machine is lost, you have the ability to wipe it if possible, but if nothing else, have it encrypted so no one else can access it and get into that machine. And then that brings up questions of multi-factor authentication to further make it difficult for anyone other than the proper owner to get into it. So we're seeing lots of devices where you're providing a secondary password. You're seeing facial recognition, even some retinal scans, which sounds very James Bond, but in reality, that's becoming more and more real in some instances in some companies. So I think all of those factors are playing into the security issues created by a mobile workforce. People are increasing their managed services spend. You cannot know everything. You certainly cannot keep up. Just think about within the last 12 months since the Colonial Pipeline hack here locally and the ransomware incident that they had, think about all that has to be done now. Not only do you have to harden the hardware and the PCs and the users, but you're now having to lock down cloud. You're having to make sure that your firewalls are up to date and that they're patched on a regular basis. You got to make sure your server and PC patches are being applied as quickly as you can. Microsoft has gone in some cases to a daily patch instead of just a weekly patching strategy. So managed services help you do all of those things that you simply cannot do with your internal staff. So managed services spend is also going to increase. I obviously have a strong bias in that given that what TCS does. But it's a great way for you to not have to expand staff in a difficult hiring environment, but be able to extend what the staff can do and not let them have to handle some of the day-to-day functions so they can focus on your line of business applications and helping you grow business. The last piece of that is, when you have hosting and you are moving to the cloud, it does create backup issues. It does create support issues. Your infrastructure is changing just from internally to externally with a cloud infrastructure piece that's added in. You're managing applications that is sometimes reside in the cloud. They may reside on a vendor's cloud. If you've got a CRM system or an ERP system sitting out there, maybe it's sitting at the vendor's location and you're managing that. So all of those components go into what you've got to deal with in IT. And that's where your managed services, it helps you do that if you're not able to grow your internal staff. We do have the first of a few poll questions that we're going to have. If you would go ahead and answer that, we'll see what response. Hopefully, we've got a few folks out there willing to contribute some ideas. So to begin with, do you plan to begin or continue a cloud move in 2022? All right, so we're seeing some folks contribute here. I think it's interesting to see that the answer probably is the same as it's been in past years. Yes, no, and maybe. So I think in past years, you probably would have had, the percentages probably would be a little bit different. Maybe it's 50%, maybe it's a little less than 50% if you took this over a larger group than just what we have willing to answer today. But if we extrapolate these numbers out across a wider range, I think you have more companies that are moving, and that is for security reasons, that is for mobility reasons. But there are still environments where they like to have that server in a closet and be able to pat it on the head at the night, make sure it's doing its job. I think about legal, where you're storing documents. Older law firms a lot of times will want to have that safety and knowing that they're going to be able to have that data somewhere that's accessible. I think you certainly have some industries in particular that are more willing to move. I think you see younger entrepreneurs will start a business. I even think about a young law firm that I work with, and they've never known anything but having their documents in the cloud. And then I think you've got the latter category that's a maybe, or people who simply aren't sure. They're still feeling things out, and that's where an advisor can help out, possibly somebody like TCS. If you have any questions, certainly we could try to answer those for you. But I think that pretty much gives us a picture of what people are looking to do. And I don't think those numbers really should surprise anybody. I would think it's probably split between those three camps. All right, so we'll go ahead and move to the next section, and then we'll have another poll question in a moment. All right, so one of the issues that we're seeing right now is there's lots of hardware that is aged. We mentioned this earlier. I want to talk a bit about it in specifics now. So servers are warranted by the manufacturer for 5 years. You can generally extend that for a couple, but by 7 years, you certainly need to be getting out of that server into the next one. You can see a parallel in operating systems. Also, they change during these times. You've got to make sure that your hardware is able to run what the current OS is, or whatever OS you're moving to. So it's big to see that's happening on the server side. And that's why as people come up to the end of their life cycle of a server, that's when they're making the cloud move. They're going, whether it be Azure or AWS or Google, they're finding another place to put their data. And it does open up some advantages. It does open up some security advantages. Think about it. Microsoft's security is much greater than you will ever be able to implement. So the days of worrying about security as a roadblock to getting to the cloud are pretty much over. You've got redundancy. You've got cloud backups that allow you to back up the data from a cloud to another location. And then you've also got the security measures that Mr. Gates and his contemporaries and cohorts are putting in place. I think you're also seeing IT departments are moving their workloads to the cloud. So you've got something that's process heavy, get it off of your hardware and put it in the cloud. Now, there may be databases that run better locally, and that may always be the case. So there is a case for having on-site servers, particularly if you're in a database environment. But if you have just some churn and lots of lots of hard drive activity, then some of that is better served in the cloud because it does get it off of your hardware. So there is no single answer. And for most companies, it's probably some kind of a combination or a hybrid of those two. Lots of end-of-life cycles are being reached. We mentioned how servers work, but PCs are the same. They come with a 3-year warranty typically that can be extended for the same 2 years for a total of 5. But if you can imagine using the same machine beyond 3 to 5 years, you're talking about a pretty slow machine that is not keeping up. There's a rule of thumb in IT that processor speed doubles every 18 months. I might argue that has been a little bit shortened now. Maybe it's more like 12 months, but the processor speed, and then you're adding multiple processors, then you're adding multiple cores and things like that are continuing to enhance how fast machines work, and applications are growing and expanding along with that. So if you've got a 5-year-old machine on somebody's desk that has to do some fairly intensive work and an important role for your company, you're probably going to need to replace that machine. And if it didn't happen in the last 2 years, you may be looking at, up to a third or half of your environment that is sitting on old PC hardware. Certainly the need these days to move from PCs to laptops to allow for mobile computing shows you how all of these factors kind of filter in and then become the larger issue that we're all dealing with today. Next poll question. We talk a little bit as we're coming out of the hardware discussion. All right, we do have 3 questions this time. Do you plan to enhance your cybersecurity strategy this year? Do you plan to use multi-factor authentication this year? And then thirdly, does your organization have a cyber insurance policy today? And as we go through waiting for everybody to answer those questions, or at least whoever's willing to, just talk a little bit about that. Cybersecurity has become huge in the news these days. And a lot of you have probably seen our presentation that we do. And there's so many places where you see cyber intrusions, where you see phishing attacks, and specifically ransomware. And we do know very locally, because of Colonial Pipeline, that we've seen that take place in our own environment, in our own local region here. So I think as we go through, you're going to find out that it's a bigger story even in 22 than it was in 21. Next, multi-factor. Okay, I'm going to wave my phone at you for a minute. The most common way that we do today, and I'll show you what we use Google Authenticator. And if I log into my system, I'm going to have an authentication request, and it's going to allow me to put in a 6-digit code that you see here on my phone, and it rotates every 60 seconds. So it is the simplest way. So you're going to put a login, and it tells it who you are. Perhaps you get a text is another way that comes through. Perhaps you have to do something else. You have to recognize a picture. You tell it you're not a robot. You pick 3 pictures of bridges, whatever it is. These are all multiple factors of authentication that we go through, and it is going to become more and more critical. And it leads us into our insurance question, because you're having more and more people today have to have cybersecurity policies, but those policies themselves are becoming more and more strict. We received a notification this week that policies are going to again become more strict. Limits are going to be decreased on what it pays out. You're going to be required to have multi-factor authentication. You're going to be required to have next generation antivirus. And if you don't know what that is, we could talk about that. But these are things that are going to come. So if we take a look at the results of our poll, everybody here plans on enhancing cybersecurity. I mean, nobody's going to answer no to that, right? But I'm glad to see everybody recognizes the very real issue there. It looks like about 2/3 voted yes to multi-factor authentication. Again, it isn't required today, but I think you're going to see it become a requirement in cybersecurity policies. I think you're going to see, if you have a compliance issue, if you're HIPAA, if you're SOX, if you're trying to complete a NIST 800 compliance process or project, you're going to see those be requirements there. So I believe that will become more and more critical as we go. And then we have really a mix of answers here. About 50% of people say yes to having a cybersecurity policy today. A third say no, and then a few, or there's an answer out there that's hopeful in the future. So I would say if you do not have a cybersecurity policy of some sort today, your exposure is great in the ransomware area in particular. So I would say go out and take a look at what those results are, what your insurance company recommends, and it is going to be a somewhat painful process, as you may have to install multi-factor and you may have to do a few other things along the way. One important thing to note, your existing business policy probably has a rider or a period in there where it does talk about cyber insurance. That is not a substitute for a full and standalone cyber policy. Please talk to your agents. We have some we could put you in touch with if you don't have one. It's not something we do directly, but hopefully most everybody has someone they're talking with about it. Get a separate policy and make sure you talk with them about what your exposure is to ransomware. And the reason I say that is that if your group internally, so one of your employees clicks on a link that launches the ransomware, most cyber policies today pay out less for that ransom because someone in your environment invited the problem in by clicking on that link. And so it just plays up the need to do cyber training internally with your users. So if we're not doing that already with you with our products, please find somewhere to make sure that you're having that email training done. And usually that's a video, 10, 15 minutes once a month. And then it is accompanied by a false phishing email of some sort, a false ransomware email. And then you see who's clicking on them and who's not. And if they do click or they do fail that test, then they've got to go back and do some remedial education through another video on the specific topic where they fail. Just so you know, those come out over a period of a week or two. The messages are different, the topics are different. So it's not a matter of your employees all knowing, hey, this week we're getting the sneaky message, let's keep an eye out for it. It is structured so that you can get a pretty good picture of your organization. So I highly recommend that. And on that note, we will move on with our discussion. All right, it appears that we are locked on our polling page. All right, security spending is up significantly over the past couple of years, as we've already talked about. And that's protecting your endpoints. And understand your endpoints now aren't just desktops sitting in your office. Your current endpoints include laptops that may be in the field and may be at home. It can include phones, if you're allowing access through email or to applications via phones. Certainly can include tablets. And as we go, we're going to see more and more. You could probably access your company's server through the fridge, depending on how you're set up and what your refrigerator offers. You certainly can be able to see people who are accessing via phone, certainly people who are sitting at hopefully not public kiosks, but it is a possibility. So you want to harden your environment against all of those possibilities. You do want to require the use of a VPN. You do want to make sure that all of your people are intelligently using the tools that you give them, and they're also being careful in doing so. So that's some of what we're going to see in the next year from a security standpoint. And we do have another poll question coming. I believe this is the last one that we're going to have for today. This one, do you plan on replacing hardware this year? I think we had these out of order. The last one was set up for our security conversation. This one goes back to the hardware discussion about what's going end of life and what has gotten old and what's out of support. So do you plan to purchase hardware? Now that could be a server, it could be PCs, could be laptops, could be, I guess, something else, but particularly those items that have been running end of life and who are finally starting to need to be replaced. And just looking at the early results here, it looks like 4 out of 5 companies, or about 80%, are looking to replace some hardware this year. I would think moving to the cloud is considered replacing hardware because you're simply getting rid of an on-site server. So that's probably included in people's thinking. And I think that's probably a pretty good number. That's in line with the normal replacement cycle of replacing every 2 or 4 years. So halfway through that would be 50%. And then you got folks who are not only looking at PCs, also looking at servers. So 80% probably is about right for companies that have had a 2-year downtime. So I think if we sort of keep that in mind, then we will we'll be on track for getting where we need to be. All right, there are the results of just as we talked about. All right, we'll move on. One of the worries that companies have, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, is about the security within the cloud. So as I mentioned, when cloud first came out and everybody was trying to offer you something in the cloud, and even today's giants, Microsoft, AWS, at Amazon, and also Google, they were in their infancy as well. So one of the big issues was security. And we had a security scare just last week, as a matter of fact. But what has happened today through that evolution is your data stored in the cloud is able to be backed up. It is able, I know in Azure, particularly with Microsoft, it's able to have a secondary location, and there simply is failover. So if they have a storm or a flood or a power outage at the primary, there's a secondary location to roll over to. So some of that security, certainly your availability issues have been answered over time. I think also the security in those facilities, both physical as well as cybersecurity, is so much greater than what you could put in your location, regardless of how much money you spend, that I'm confident in saying today, security at these big three cloud providers are much greater than what you could have locally. That does then put the onus on you to protect your endpoints and protect your remote users. Because what can happen, as we alluded to in the cyber discussion a moment ago, is you can certainly have someone click on a link that launches a ransomware attack or launches some other kind of attack from a phishing email into your environment. So you have actually invited the trouble in. Now, you're not going to find Microsoft, Google, or AWS being able to protect you on something you do internally. That's sort of a self-inflicted wound. So your responsibility there doesn't change whether it's a local server or whether it's a cloud-based server. So just make sure that we keep that in mind, but make sure we are protecting what we can locally and then trusting to the cloud what is in the cloud. We're also looking to see workloads are increased. Okay. So as more people move, more things are being done. We're looking to see 50% of workloads expected to run in the cloud by next year. And that's up 10% from last year. So over a 2-year span, we're seeing a 10% increase. And as we talked about, the normal is about a 50-50 split between who wants to go cloud and who doesn't. And what we're seeing here is for those who are in the cloud, they're doing more and more there. So it's successful for them. They're benefiting from it. So they're moving more of their individual workloads to the cloud. All right. So as we turn our attention to not only what the year holds, but doing some predictions for next year and beyond, we've learned lots and lots of tools that we've used in the past. And the question is, how are they going to move forward with us? Zoom and Teams have been an absolute revelation. I mean, we're doing this presentation here via Zoom, and they're so much more advanced than what we did 2 years ago for the same type of webinar. Microsoft Teams has been great. Not only do you get the collaboration, not only can you attach files, but you also get the chat or the text functions that take place. You've got the ability to launch a call from Teams and do it over the network. So I think those kinds of things are going to become a bigger part of our businesses as we move into the next year and even beyond that. SharePoint is another one. SharePoint is a nice hybrid between what is strictly cloud and what is strictly local. It does allow you to store a lot of files, but the big thing it does is provide for collaboration. Obviously, we can work on the same document together, making changes, and they all get saved. But we can also use it for backups and storage of those documents. So the SharePoint growth, it has sort of been growing incrementally over time. I think you're going to see an exponential growth as we move into the future for this year and next. I wish we had a poll question about using the Microsoft 365. I think we're really seeing a big boom there. Probably half of our clients have made the move already, not only for email, but also for OneDrive for storage for the local machines, especially since we're working in different places and have access individually, have access needs to those documents, but also those who are taking advantage of the full suite, the Office applications via 365, so that you have the latest version. Everybody is on the same version. Everybody's sending out documents that are all at the same version level. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. I think you're going to see email servers on site going away almost entirely over the next few years. I think the next one, VPNs. We talked about the importance earlier, but if I'm working from home, if I'm working, heaven forbid, from Starbucks or somewhere on a public Wi-Fi, it is critical that we use VPNs when exchanging that data across our company networks and back to a server or to a cloud server. Not doing so just opens that up. In some cases, will violate cybersecurity policies and certainly some of the compliance issues that are out there. Using remote desktops. Remote desktops is still a viable option. The reason being, you have a point application. It's no longer I'm putting all of my data in the cloud. It's I need to run an application. It needs to do some local processing, but I need to access it from everywhere. So again, through that VPN, accessing the remote server, and you're going to use that, even though it may still be on your site, you're going to use that remotely. So it's a nice little combination of keeping some of the heavy database work locally. Perhaps you've got compliance or reasons you need to have that server locally, but accessing that through a remote desktop allows you to maintain that compliance, but also put that extra layer of security in there that you need. Wi-Fi networks, growing, changing, moving. To IPs, things like that. We talked about Byod policies. You cannot keep people off of your network very easily. And you can't just set up a guest Wi-Fi that goes to the same server, the same Wi-Fi that you've been using. You've got to be intelligent about that. Somebody brings in a phone. I know mine connects as soon as I walk in the door here at the office. So you want to make sure that you put some policies in place around that. What is acceptable use? What can they access? Make sure you have a very hardened guest policy as well as guest network that does not allow them access to your servers. And things like that are going to be critical. Multi-factor, we've already talked about, that's only going to become stronger and only become a greater requirement, particularly from the insurance companies. So I think that's a continued growth, and we may get to that James Bond retinal scan sooner than we think. And then the last piece here on this list, as we talked about earlier, those insurance policies are going to become more and more strict. They're going to become more difficult to administer. We mentioned earlier that if someone in your office clicks on a link that launches a ransomware attack, then you're probably going to have a reduced payout from your insurance company. And I can't say that I blame them. I mean, if somebody internally brings the threat inside themselves, you can be protected, but you will not be as protected as if it were simply someone from outside coming in on their own volition, as opposed to being invited. So I think those are all issues that are going to come up in the next year and beyond. So as we look at emerging technology and adoption within the industry, you're going to see a lot of these same issues here that come up. Securing remote workers, we've talked at length about that. We talked about how they are just really ripe targets. If you do not have a VPN, or if you do not have a firewall at their location, they're just as big a target for spamming, phishing, and of course ransomware, regardless of how they're connected. And so you're going to need to invest in those security solutions that harden that. You're going to need to invest in training of your people, like we talked about, and doing the test phishing emails, so they at least slow down and take a look. They check links before they click on them. They check URLs and make sure they're not cleverly disguised. My greatest example is getting an email from Wells Fargo where Wells is spelled with 2 I's, capital I's instead of L's. Okay. Things like that, where the link looks good, but if it doesn't make sense, they need the training to know to move past that. Within the next couple of years, you're going to see most organizations are going to adopt this kind of training, this kind of solution. Encryption, you're going to have firewalls, you're going to have VPNs. Don't wait until you've been the victim of something to motivate you to do that. As we sit here and say within the next 2 years, well, a lot of you've probably already made that move. But let's make sure that if you do need to do that, do need to get there, let's do it within this year. Let's do it tomorrow. Don't wait until you've been the victim of something before you make that leap. If you think about the implications of that, and I don't do this out of fear, but I do it out of information for you, but you're not just looking at having to pay a ransom. You may be looking at the downtime that's involved. You may be looking at employees sitting around with nothing to do because they can't access resources or it's been encrypted. You may look at lost business, lost reputation. You may look at an ability to communicate with suppliers and customers. So there are lots of reasons that you want to avoid that sort of downtime, and it all comes back to making sure that we're securing our environments. And as though those aren't enough challenges, here are a couple others to talk about and how those can be opportunities as we go forward. Over the next 12 months, you've probably already seen it. There are going to be delays and other kinds of challenges in receiving hardware. I think we're still a few weeks out on the most common, PCs and laptops. The more you go upstream, the more it needs to do, the higher the cost. Those things are readily available because the demand isn't as great. But especially coming off of Christmas, those components were put in a lot of home machines. It may be multiple weeks, it may be a month or two in some cases to get the configuration that you want for your hardware. Servers are having the same issues. There are chip issues there as well. But I think you're going to see that you're going to deal with limited availability. You could deal with shipping issues depending on it has to come from overseas as opposed to being in a warehouse staged and ready to ship. You're going to look at supply chain. We've heard about the chips and some of the cars that the manufacturers are trying to put out. We've got the same kinds of things in our industry, not maybe to the same extent, but it has delayed. It's taken you longer to get those. So understand that we're going to have, at least for the foreseeable future, more lead time that you need to factor into getting that hardware. So as we think about what we're taking away from all of this, we talk about the need for security, the need to replace hardware, the patterns that we see and the trends that we see going into this year. There are a few things that we want to come out of here with today. And one is that things are growing, things are rebounding. People are getting back up to speed. Hopefully hiring is going to improve. And as a result of that, we're going to need to grow with that. And some of that is great news. We're going to get people back to work and we're going to get our IT will be more protected and more secure. Some of that is creating need, which is we've got to replace old hardware. We've got to get new hardware as we grow. So with every challenge comes an opportunity, and we've got to manage both ends of the spectrum there. Moving to the cloud, it's not what it was 5 years ago. It's not what it was 2 years ago. Okay, the security is greater, the functionality is greater. I would suggest that the mobile workforce makes the need greater. So look for opportunities to enhance your presence in the cloud. Look for opportunities to move and offload some of the in-house functions to the cloud. When that server comes up for replacement, take a look at the possibility of putting it in the cloud rather than putting it on site. So those are ways that you can get advantages and in fact increase your security and flexibility, even at a time when we have to replace older hardware. You're probably going to see the IT budgets grow as a percentage of income as well. Doesn't mean that you're going to see it double and triple or anything frightening, but it probably does say to make our new mobile workforce more effective, we've got to make a few changes and expand. It probably means for us to offload some of what we're doing in-house and go to the cloud, there's going to be an upfront cost for that, though the savings over time, and by that I mean multiple years, 5 years, 10 years, though you'll see savings there, though the upfront cost may be greater. So let's keep in mind that budgets are probably going to grow, but it is in many cases to make you better and stronger and faster, as opposed to being something punitive. And we always want to look to modernize those processes and continue to embrace cloud and mobile workforce as a way to make us better, not a detriment to business. So as we say all of that and we bring the presentation to a close, understand that we're here to help. I mean, just answering questions, just talking about what your plans are. We do offer a consultation, a cloud review, if you will, a review of the technology that you have in-house. And certainly we can talk about experiences with other clients that we've had, confidentially, of course, but let you know some of the options that are out there. So if you have questions, give me a call, talk with the folks that you work with, whether it's some of our CSM managers, Al and James. But make sure that if you have questions, we answer them now and make wise decisions going forward. So I think Ashley has rejoined us, and I think she had a gift card she wanted to share. And then after she does that, and anybody who would like to ask questions, we can hang around and do that.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do the $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. And while we're doing that, we'll go ahead and take time for questions as well. So just a reminder to type those into the question box. And let's go ahead and spin the wheel to see who the winner of the $25 gift card is going to be. All right, it looks like Marty Magnum, you have won a $25 Amazon gift card. And as soon as this webinar is over, I'll send you an email and we'll send that over to you. And let's see if we have any questions. Andy, it looks like so far I don't see any questions coming in.
All right, I'll check and see if I received any via email. I do have one that is really, it sounds like a little frustration around cyber insurance. So the question is, why does it become more difficult and more expensive year after year? Well, and I hate to sit here and take the side of the insurance company, right? Who likes to do that, unless you work for one? But their exposure is greater each year that we go down this path. So if you were writing your 2021 policy for Colonial Pipeline, you probably had some things you took care of, you put in there, you want to make sure they got their multi-factor set up. As you're writing your 2022 policy for Colonial Pipeline, you probably have a lot more issues that you're talking about because of their very public and embarrassing hit that they've taken. So if you look at it from the insurance company's perspective, they had to pay out, I would imagine, on that policy or the $4 million ransom that was paid. But they had to do that because someone at Colonial clicked on a ransomware link and invited that malware inside that caused the encryption of their data. So from the insurance company's perspective, they need to make sure they're not paying out millions of dollars because someone clicked a wrong link. So you will see those policies with the premiums increase, the restrictions that are being added, and unfortunately, we're probably all going to have our policies change in ways that we don't like over the next year or two. So looks like we have a couple additional questions. They're both related to VPN, so let me go through them one at a time. One, is a VPN necessary if we connect via a secure connection? And I'm going to say yes. The reason is that the VPN doesn't just protect through that traffic that you want to allow in and that is coming in through the front door. A VPN is also going to be able to look at the patterns of the traffic and protect you against what's coming in that you don't want. It's going to allow some geofencing. It's going to be able to look at types of data. It's going to be able to look at ways to protect you from that even coming to your front door. So I would think that the VPN is going to perform those functions that your firewall traditionally has. It's also going to keep you safe on the remote end. So again, I use the Starbucks example because someone can be sitting in Starbucks, use a device known as a pineapple, and what they do is they intercept your transmission or your transaction when you connect, and you're connecting to Starbucks, AT&T Wi-Fi 1234, and in fact, they've simply spoofed that name. They're still providing the connection to the server or the Wi-Fi network there at Starbucks, but all your traffic is going through them. So the fact that you're going to an HTTPS server on the back end doesn't make your traffic any more safe as it traverses the network wherever you're sitting remotely. So yes, if you're at home, you need a VPN. If you're certainly on a public Wi-Fi, you need a VPN. You also need that firewall that it's working through to provide you some of that additional protection that I mentioned earlier against the types of traffic coming into your network. So simple answer, yes, VPN always, firewall always, and then continue to use HTTPS. Next one is a VPN connection advised if using 365 for a remote user. I would say the answer is kind of the same. It's not so much going to Microsoft because they're going to have the security that I talked about earlier. It's making sure that your remote user is protected at home. So whether they're sitting in an apartment complex and everybody's running around trying to hack each other's Wi-Fi, or the Starbucks example we just gave. So yes, I would say even if you're sitting at home using 365, you're not seeking protection from Microsoft, you're seeking protection for your remote user. And so that's why I would suggest that you have that VPN connection. Now, do you need it going to everything on the internet, checking scores on ESPN? No, that's up to personal protection and what you're doing. I would suggest if it's a company asset, either don't go to those types of sites or use that VPN to protect you when you do. But certainly if you're connecting back into work or using Office 365 for business, then having those VPNs and encrypting those tunnels is going to be a good idea. All right, I think that's it. If anybody has another question that we haven't addressed, again, my name is Andy Purcell. Feel free to contact me here at TCS. Feel free to contact whoever you're working with or speaking with. We're happy to answer questions related to that. And hopefully we will all have a prosperous and secure 2022. Thank you for being with us today, and I'll look forward to our next time to get together. Thank you.
Andy, can you please advance to the next slide? If you do have any questions or would like to reach out to us for a consult, please connect with us by email or visiting our website or calling us. And next month, we have a lunch and learn in Greensboro on cyber risk insurance with Marsh McLennan Agency. And so be on the lookout for an email about that event. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you.